2022 analysis. The legislature approved $39.3 million, including $27.0 million SGF for the KBI for fiscal year 2022. Then there was an SGF reappropriation of $1.1 million. So their starting point for this was $40.4 million, including $28.1 million SGF. The agency requests a revised estimate of $41.5 million, including $28.1 million SGF in fiscal year 2022. And this also includes that number 2 that you see, coronavirus emergency supplemental funding, so necessary supplies and PPE, e-citation, national priority safety. So this program is for the citations to be electronic and to help with searches for investigative purposes, and it also staffs a records manager position. And number 4, National Criminal History Improvement Project is a federal program for court records, arrest reports, offense reports, and that totaled $354,674. And then all the other adjustments include a decrease of 2,851 SGF that was related to capers, offset by a grant that the agency received. And the FTE stayed the same. The governor concurs with the agency's request for fiscal year 2022, and I'm happy to stand for questions on 2022.
Are there any questions for Short? Seeing none, please continue.
Page 8 lays out the change from actual expenditures. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then on page 9, you will find the fiscal year 2023 analysis. The agency requests $40.2 million, including $27.9 million SGF for fiscal year 2023. This is a decrease of $1.2 million below their fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. The first 3 adjustments are the reduction of the 3 changes from fiscal year 2022. And then on page 10, numbers 4 through 6 are enhancements that the agency requested. The first being Forensic Scientist Recruitment and Retention Initiative, seeking to implement a salary adjustment to be more competitive in the job market. Number 5, Professional Staff Recruitment and Retention Initiative, so administrative assistants, application developers, and other technical professions. And number 6, KBI, Commissioned Personnel Recruitment and Retention Initiative, so special agents and that part of the agency. Number 7 was the reinstatement of the base budget. So with the governor's reduced resource package for fiscal year 2022, the 10%, the agency is requesting to receive that back, and that is number 7. And number 8 would be shrinkage and seeing the number of vacant positions in previous fiscal years and planning for a portion of these positions to remain vacant. All other adjustments include salaries and wages, specifically capers and group health hospitalization insurance. The governor's recommendation is on page 11. And that totals $40.2 million, including $28.8 million SGF for fiscal year 2023. The recommendation is a decrease of $3 million, primarily attributable to the governor not reinstating or not accepting the 3 enhancements that the agency requested. Those are numbers 12 through 14. Number 10, the governor did accept the agency's enhancement to reinstate their base budget for 10% of the agency's fiscal year 2022 budget. And the governor also recommended a shift of $943,925 from the Kansas Criminal Justice Information System Fund to the SGF. This is primarily attributable to the elimination of a transfer from the Division of Vehicles Modernization surcharge. And the rest of the document is more detail on the enhancement requests and programs, as well as performance measure information. And I would note that Director Thompson is here today to speak to you about this agency budget.
Charday, thank you. Any questions for Charday? Seeing none, thank you. Next, we'll hear from the Director, Kurt Thompson, KBI. Welcome, committee, Kurt.
There we go. How about now? There we go. Just as a restatement, my name is Kirk Thompson, and I currently have the privilege to serve as the Director of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. And given our limited time this morning, I'm just going to jump right in and start on a couple of things that I wanted to bring to your attention about things that occurred last session, last year, when financial assistance was provided to the agency. The first was that we received funding for the ABIS, or the Automated Biometric Identification System, which is a replacement for a current technology that's known as AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. That was a $6.9 million appropriation back in 2021 to acquire and install this new technology that was end of life. The second thing I'd like to bring to your attention is during the course of this past year, we've worked with our local law enforcement partners to create a Kansas use of force repository. As you well know, there's a lot of controversy out there about the use of force by law enforcement personnel, and there's never been any clear data or good data that has been collected for the state of Kansas. So we began the process at the request of the Attorney General to build a data collection system to capture that data to provide accurate information to law enforcement agencies, to the legislature, city and county boards, and other interested parties, including citizens. So we hope that this use of force data collection will serve as an important resource. That initial module of the system was created and it has completed, and we are now beginning to collect data. It will probably take 6 months or so before we have sufficient amount of data within that system for it to be meaningful. Those were two high-end positive things I would like to bring to your attention from the last year, but unfortunately we've got some bad news too, and that is that there was a marked increase in state violent crime. In 2020, the violent crime rate in Kansas rose 9.3%, which is about 24.4% above the 10-year average. The murder rate between 2019 and 2020 rose by 48.5%. Now we've seen a slight decline in that rate this year, but we still have a much higher rate than the 10-year average that we have been seeing. So if you couple the general overall violent crime increases, the number of drug overdose deaths that we are seeing, the transnational crime that we're addressing, human trafficking, the police use of force cases, child victim crime, a huge number of public complaints about law enforcement conduct, and the list just keeps going on and on. We need some assistance. That's the bottom line. Our ability to respond to local law enforcement's requests for assistance in each of these areas has been diminished based upon the state of our budget and the state of our ability to bring resources onto the agency. So let me turn my attention to the 2023 budget and let you know that last year, given what we believed was going to be the fiscal position of the state, we decided not to bring forward any enhancement requests for consideration. and we did not do that. However, we received a 4.5% allocation, which we appealed and got that down to about 1.05 million. And then with further work with the governor's office, before the governor's budget came out, then there was an approval, if you will, a recommendation from the governor's office to return us to base budget. So as we begin 2023, we will be at base budget. As we looked at what our agency has been doing, what our mission set is, before we could begin to structure a clear strategy for increasing our ability, our capacity for accomplishing our mission, we have to address recruiting and retention in our workforce. And sadly, our agency is facing serious challenges like many other state agencies and others in the private sector. What I think is different in what our request is we are trying to look at the agency as in total. The work of the agency is in three major areas, and that's in investigative operations, in forensic science, and in information collection and managing all of the repositories for crime data within the state of Kansas. So all of these three major functions work together to comprise kind of a comprehensive suite of services to provide to our criminal justice partners, and we really can't fail in any of them. So it was important for us to bring forth a plan to address recruiting and retention across the entire scope of the agency. So I want to go through these three separate but related plans very, very quickly. The first deals with our sworn personnel. And this is an inexpensive enhancement request. It's right now at $1.7 million. Our success as an agency is based upon the quality of the personnel that we are able to hire and bring to bear on the crime problem in Kansas. So we make every effort to hire highly qualified and experienced personnel. Generally, we are seeking someone who has 6 years experience as a law enforcement officer. Majority of that we hope to see as investigative experience, and we hope that that comes from significantly large agencies, if you will, that have had the opportunity to do all types of criminal investigative work. Past 6 years, as we've tried to hire personnel, less than 10% of our applicants can meet those preferred qualifications for our agency. So what we propose is adjusting our career progression plan and try to bring our salaries more in line with those of the agencies that we hire from within the state of Kansas. So we conducted a market study of comparable starting and ending salaries of the several larger agencies within Kansas that we recruit from. And we were 5 out of 12 amongst other state organizations in, say, Oklahoma, Missouri, the surrounding states that we looked at. And we were about $9,300 less or below the average starting salary for those positions. But we really wanted to focus our concentration on the agencies inside the state of Kansas where we recruit. And so looking at those agencies, our salary was about $12,000 lower than the starting pay for local law enforcement agencies for investigative personnel. So that definitely correlates with the difficulty in hiring the personnel that we are looking for. Now, since our original proposal, we've been working with the Division of Budget and the Department of Administration very collaboratively to refine our plan and to find an appropriate and impactful solution to this problem. And those efforts, I think, have been very successful. And so we are, what you see in front of you is a slightly different plan than what was in our budget document back in September. Figure 1 in the testimony that you have in front of you, hopefully, gives you an idea of the starting pay for KBI personnel in regard to other state investigative agencies in their surrounding states. And you're able to see where our current salary puts us and then where our proposed salary puts us. So the proposal doesn't put us anywhere near top of scale. What it does is put us directly in the middle of the pack, if you will. The next page, or figure number 2, deals with starting investigator pay from large Kansas agencies. And if you'll see from this graph, we start at the very bottom of the table. And with our proposed changes, we will be somewhere in the middle of the pack, somewhere between Johnson County SO and Lenexa Police Department. So at a very high level, what this plan does is start our personnel at about 16% higher than where the current starting pay is. And it was important that we try to front load the plan so that we can address the most serious concern, and that's getting people into our agency. And then that would follow up with an additional 2.5% increase after the first year to help with the challenges of recruitment, but also to make sure that we retain the personnel that we have acquired. The increases across the pay plan, if you will, are fairly consistent, except in the command ranks, and those are reduced by about half. So in the back of the testimony, there is an addendum that will detail all of this information in chart form that you could look at, and I won't try to go into it given our time frame that we have that we're working under today. The second enhancement request deals with our forensic scientists, and this is a highly technical and very marketable group of employees. What our proposal is to acknowledge them and compensate them for their years of service with the laboratory and recognize something that we are going to call merits, different things that sets them apart within their disciplines, whether it be advanced degrees, certifications, or other lead roles within their respective disciplines. Just to give you a sense, a DNA scientist, for example, it costs almost $200,000 to train in over 2 years. The investment that we have in these individuals is very, very significant. So it is really important for us to retain that investment. And we believe that the plan that we are proposing that you'll have before you is a good way of doing that. The Forensic Science Laboratory basically has 3 categories. The Forensic Scientist 1 is 0 through the first 2 years, and that's when they're in that training mode. That's when they're generally fresh out of college, and so that first 2 years is a training time period. They move to a Forensic Scientist 2 classification, which is kind of the workhorse of the agency, if you will. They're the ones that are doing all of the analysis, the basic analysis for criminal cases across the state. And then after a period of time and meeting merits, then they would move to what we call a Forensic Scientist 3. And those are the high end of the bench scientists. They are capable of doing the more complex crimes, and they also have different duties associated that provide additional value to the agency and gives them some growth room. So what you will see on back in the addendum section is a complete copy of our proposed pay plan for our forensic scientists and those who support, those who support the forensic science personnel within our agency. There would be approximately across the board, it's very difficult because each one's going to go to a different place, but there's about an 11% increase based on the overall dollar amount for this particular proposal. And right now that's at about $947,000, and about 95 personnel are impacted. The third bucket of this plan, if you will, is an enhancement request for our professional staff. And the work of the forensic scientists and the work of the special agents is facilitated greatly by members of the professional staff. And most of the repository work that supports local law enforcement agencies, the courts, prosecutors, that kind of thing, are done by professional staff in our Information Services Division. There would be about 130 employees impacted by this particular enhancement request. And what we are hoping to do here is to recognize the level of basically a security clearance that these employees have to have in order to deal with the sensitive information that they work with on a daily basis. To get that to that clearance point, there's an extensive background investigation that includes a polygraph examination that's done on each of these employees. And just to give you a sense, 54% of the people who we make conditional offers to do not pass the background investigation. So it's a high mark to get to. But it also provides with a huge downside in that most state agencies, in the same position, a person could go to that state agency and interview for a job and get that job and go to work within a week or so. This process takes about 2 months, and without some recognition of what they have to go through and that additional requirement, we really struggle to find personnel who are willing to accept these positions. And it's absolutely necessary that we do backgrounds like this for these personnel because they do handle very confidential and sensitive data on a regular basis. In regard to that particular group of individuals, our strategy, our performance measures call for a 5% vacancy rate. We have not been able to get there for the last several years. In fact, from 2017 through 2020, we're seeing a 15 to an 18% vacancy rate, which makes getting our work done much, much more difficult. And some of our positions start at the $12.66 per hour. And it's very important to us to recognize that additional step that these employees must take. So we're seeking what we would see as differential pay for individuals who are in that situation that must go through that background process and allow us to compensate them at a rate 10% above where a similarly situated person in another agency would be. So let me jump to a couple other points real quick. First is as you know, you approved the building of a forensic science laboratory for us several years ago, and that was bonded back in 2013. Right now, the bonds are callable, and so there is an opportunity for us to either refinance or, if the will of the legislature, to proceed with paying off that amount. It started with a principal of $57 million, and it is now, the principal balance is around $41 million, and the annual debt service on that is about $4.3 million. And so that equates to, if we could address that bond payment, that would save about $3.6 million in interest costs alone. So we think it's an important thing for us to look into. We could proceed forward on our own with the refinancing of the bond. But if there is some interest on the part of this committee to pay off the bond, and given the amount, we're sure amenable to that also. But we would like for you to consider and give us some indication of possibly where you would like to move, which direction that you would like to move. Last point I want to bring up is we are doing everything we can to make full utilization of ARPA funds to address any deficits that we have seen. In our package, you will see in the addendum a listing of projects that we are proposing utilizing ARPA funds, and right now that's a little over $5 million in requests that are outstanding. So, in a nutshell, that is our request or our presentation to this body. There's much more that I could say, but in deference to time here, I would make the following request of the committee, and that's to go with the governor's recommendation for returning us to base budget, which is in the governor's budget proposal, and that's to return about $1.05 million to the agency that was taken as an allotment. Secondly, I would ask that you would support any further budget adjustments that might come about from the Division of Budget or the Governor's Office relating to our recruiting and retention plans. At minimum, we would ask you to support the plans or if unable to do that, at least defer decision upon those plans to omnibus, when I'm sure that you will be hearing and seeing a lot of other similar recruiting and retention plans. And then the last thing I would ask is that you provide some input to us about whether to proceed forward on refinancing the bond, which would provide for some significant savings to the state, or whether you would provide direction that we attempt to pay that bond off with support or an appropriation for the legislature. And I'm sorry to run over, but I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Kurt. Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kurt, going back to the $1 million in the base budget that you want restored, that the governor concurred with, if you were to characterize where that money came from and then where it would go back to fill in, are there specific spots where that would be, where you would characterize that as being most helpful?
Yes, where most of that money came from, we left positions open that were funded. And I think we tried to make clear that we could do that 1 year without terribly detrimental effects, but that could not be a long-term solution for us to, I think we had 14 positions, higher end positions, that we left vacant so that we could meet that allotment. So we would be returning that money to the salary pool, if you will.
So if you fill those positions, then that money is available to pay the salaries for any filled positions that you would fill in the future.
14 of them at least.
Who sets the performance measure that has you going down to 5% vacancy?
I do.
Is that realistic?
From prior years, we really believe that it was. We had always had a lot of interest in people coming to work for the organization, and we haven't been able to maintain that. So is it realistic now? Probably not, and we probably need to address that. Is it realistic with the support that we're asking for on a recruiting and retention plan? I sure believe it will help a lot, but we really won't know until we've had a couple of years under our belt with the recruiting and retention plan, if it comes to pass.
Did the budget director give you an idea why both of those pieces of the recruitment and retention plan were rejected?
I really hate to speak for someone else, but I think their hope was that we would refine our plan and focus it more on the areas where we were struggling most, not look at just a wide swath kind of repair to our salary structure. And with the input from their office and with the input from the division, or Department of Administration, we've tried to focus on putting the money at the various places. In the special agent classes, it would be at the front end. That's where we got to draw people in. Once we've got them there, it's not quite as hard to hold on to them. In the forensic science classes, we can generally get them in the door, but once we get them there and we spend all this money to train them, then they're very, very marketable to other laboratories across the Midwest and everywhere in the country. That's where we tend to lose them. So that's where we really wanted to strengthen our ability to retain our personnel. And again, where we are struggling with our professional staff is we can't be competitive with what we expect our professional staff to go through for that security and integrity clearance, and they can get a similar position somewhere else much quicker and at least at the same salary rate. So that's kind of the three areas that we were focused on that we thought would be the biggest impact to bringing our vacancy levels up to a much or down to a much lower level.
So last question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you revised it, did the monetary amount required change, or is it the same amount of money for each?
The percentage amounts for the forensic science classes and the professional staff remained the same. The revision took the percentage in the sworn classification downward.
But didn't change the overall amount of dollars necessary to fund? Are you still asking for 917 and 947, or roughly? Is that
for the other two?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Thompson, for your presentation. What is the rate and term on the service of that debt you're talking about? How long do we have left, and what's the rate on it? Do you know?
I do. If you would, I think we have about 10 years remaining, and it's about 5% now. That data would be included back where with an addendum that would be more specific and to the point.
Thank you. Okay. The other question that it was kind of along retention. You know, as I sat here and listened to the problem, everybody's having this problem. So as you go out and recruit, you're going to be taking them from somebody else. They're going to have a problem. And I, through the thought process, is how you maybe recruit right out of school or something, maybe take lesser on the front end because you're going to have to train them, and then pay them more money as you go along once they're training. And I just have thought, because as you take them, we're going to have problems with everybody, and everybody's going to go up, and you'll be back here with the same problem. So
that's a complex question, but it kind of goes to the heart of the issue.
yeah.
So let me start with saying that most law enforcement agencies in Kansas are very small. Most do not have any kind of an investigative capacity, and those that do not experience maybe the level of violent crime, the level of computer crime, all of the different things that we as an agency experience. We operate on kind of a principle of economy of scale. All of these smaller agencies can't afford to have people trained to a certain level and the equipment to handle those kinds of cases. But if we do that, if we can do that as our organization and then provide support to all of the local agencies that are out there, that's where the value of our agency really comes to bear. By doing that, we may be pulling employees from the larger metropolitan areas, but we're also supporting the law enforcement community in those areas by being able to do use of force investigations, those kinds of things for those individual agencies. We also are tending to leave people where they are at. Our salaries are just not able to draw people from Kansas City and say, we need somebody in Liberal. That's not going to happen. But if we can find qualified personnel in Kansas City and we leave them, as long as it still makes logistic sense for us and we still have the ability to respond on a statewide basis, we do that. So in essence, we are hiring from someone else, but we are training them up. We're leaving them in the general area, and their job is to support those local agencies. So it hasn't been seen that negatively, at least as brought to my attention by our local partners. And our local partners realize they've got some stars out there in their agencies, and they're not going to be able to keep them. And at least by setting them up to come to work for us, they're able to keep them. We're able to keep them in the state, and public service, public safety is benefited.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Kurt.
Thank you very much.
Committee, I think maybe we'll just go ahead and deliberate each one of these as we go. Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move the Kansas Bureau of Investigation budget for 22 and 23 with the recommendation that the Senate Ways and Means Committee review the potential of paying off the bond early. Yeah, it'd be at the governor's rec.
I have a motion and a second by Senator Fagg. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next we'll have a hearing and deliberation on the agency budget. Okay, we'll start our hearing deliberation on the agency budget for the Kansas Highway Patrol. And first off, we'll have Megan Leopold, KLRD Agency Budget Analysis. Megan, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll be reviewing the budget for Kansas Highway Patrol. I'm going to start my presentation on page 6. of the budget analysis document. At the top of the page, you'll see fiscal year 2022 analysis. The table at the top, you can see that there were no changes to the amount that was approved by the 2021 legislature. Changes made by the agency were an addition of $135,000 of COVID relief transaction funds. These are funds that were budgeted for fiscal year 21, not used, and pushed forward into fiscal year 22. There's also some adjustments to capital improvements. If you look down at number 3, underneath the table, you'll see that these were largely due to some revisiting priorities and also the removal of a project for the removal of the storage building at Troop E. And that was $400,000. For the governor's recommendation, you'll see that the governor's recommendation totals $120 million. This is $18.1 million SGF, and it's an increase of $18.1 million or 17.7% all SGF above the agency's fiscal year 22 revised estimate. The reason for this increase is the agency had an enhancement for fiscal year 23 for aircraft. This, the governor has recommended that this be funded in fiscal year 22, and rather than using fee funds as recommended by the agency or requested by the agency, the governor is recommending state general funds be used for this. So moving forward to fiscal year 23, on page 8, you'll see the inverse of that SGF recommendation of $18.1 million. The agency has added $18.1 million to their revised estimate from fiscal year 22. They've also have an enhancement request for the Air Force operations budget, an annual operating budget for the aircraft unit. Together, these and also additional other adjustments increase their budget request to $122 million from their revised request, above the revised request. You'll see below in the governor's recommendation the deletion of the $18.1 million. This is because the agency's enhancement that they added to their fiscal year 23 budget, the governor is recommending that that not be funded in 23 and that be moved to fiscal year 22. You'll also see in the governor's recommendation $3.6 million added to the career progression plan. This is to alter the plan to enhance recruitment and retainment of law enforcement officers and troopers. On page 10, you can see that $18.1 million enhancement that is funded in the governor's recommendation in fiscal year 22. It includes 2 helicopters, a multi-purpose single-engine airplane, updating or upgrading of the forward-looking infrared radar, and a trade-in of 3 current agency aircraft. The total of those together, plus the money that would be expected to come in from the trade-in, adds up to $18.1 million. At the bottom of page 10, you'll see the outline for the annual operating budget for the aircraft unit, the agency's second enhancement request in fiscal year 23. And in the table, you can see it divided out into contractual commodities and capital outlay. Moving forward to page 11, there's a table that depicts the agency's budget as categorized by program, including program amounts and FTE positions. The rest of the budget analysis document is broken up into programs. Because there weren't many adjustments in the governor's recommendation, most of them concur with the and most of the governor's recommendation is concurring with the agency request. The exception is on aircraft operations, page 14. There's a table at the top that depicts that funding for the $18.1 million enhancement request in fiscal year 22, and the governor's recommendation in fiscal year 23 in the agency's request. Finally, operations support on page 26. In that program, you can also see the governor's recommendation of the $3.6 million for the career progression plan. Lastly, on page 32, you'll see the capital improvements budget for the agency. The governor concurred with the agency's request for capital improvements for both fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. In addition, this capital improvements budget was heard in front of Joint Building Committee this session, and the Joint Building Committee has also concurred with the governor's recommendations for fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Megan. Questions for Megan? Seeing none, thank you. Next, we'll have Colonel Herman Jones, Superintendent, Kansas Highway Patrol. Welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. I appreciate you having an opportunity to come and speak to you on behalf of the proposed budget from the governor's office there. Now, I will say that there's quite a bit of a lift of what we've asked and what's been asked for our aircraft, which is something very significant. It's very instrumental for law enforcement in carrying out our missions there. But before I go any further there, I've got our agency's CFO that will give more details on the budget proposal. I'd like for her to step forward, please. Sherry Mackey.
Good afternoon. I'm Sherry Mackey. I'm the CFO for the Kansas Highway Patrol. Thank you for the opportunity to share some more details on our budget today. Everybody should have the handout, I think, that we provided to your committee. The agenda, we're going to do a high-level overview of the governor's budget recommendation, getting into a little bit of the methodology so you know where we came from when we prepared the budget, some of the key initiatives that the agency is engaged in, do a high-level budget year comparison by program. We budget by program at the agency. I might note, too, that some of the numbers that you saw that Megan provided, we include off budget because it is a program, so it looks just a little bit higher. I'll go into those numbers here in a minute, too. Then we'll go into the KHP enhancements, and I have Colonel Jones here if you have questions on the pay plan, and then Captain Vanderwide on the aircraft. And then we'll give you an update on coronavirus and ARPA funding for the agency and what we're seeking now. So starting on page 3 of the presentation, as Megan indicated, we've maintained the approved base funding for the fiscal year 22 operations as was approved in the 21 legislative session. And it was just at $56 million, a little over that. In fiscal year 23, the appropriated fund, it's about an 8.7% increase, and you'll see that with some of the enhancements as I go through the rest of the presentation that accounted for that, as well as some of the increases in budget indices that we were provided. So a little bit of the history. We went through and analyzed approximately 4 years of the revenues and expenditures, removed all the outliers. We had COVID expenditures. We have something that's called 1122 program, Partners Program, where smaller agencies can purchase vehicles through our agency. So we take those out of there. We don't budget for them. And then we had some major projects last year, which include tasers, our MDUs, and rifles. So some of our life safety equipment had reached end of life, and we replaced those. We also added in known expenditures. Those include some of the personnel adjustments. Major projects, we have a CGIS software project in place, and we also have in-car videos and some other equipment for the uniformed officers. There was an additional clothing allowance that was allotted for our uniforms this past year. And then we have some OITS expenditures and IT expenditures with some of the projects that are going on that increase the budget. And then lastly, we applied the key assumptions, which I'm sure every other agency did as well, the budget indices that were provided to us for the budget in salaries and wages and benefits. So you'll see increases on those, and then general commodities as well. So some of the key initiatives that the Highway Patrol is engaged in. We continue to focus on the agency performance metrics. I think there was an audit on those, and that's something that we measure each year and engage our focus on out in the field. We have an in-car video upgrade. We have the CD discs that are in there now, and the uploads is getting into the 21st century, I guess, with that equipment. Our criminal justice information system needs an upgrade, so we're working on that. And there's various other life safety equipment replacement. We also have the CPP enhancement for our personnel. Our website, we're looking to upgrade that. The agency is one of the few that's a Tri-ARC accreditation recertification. We're working through that as well. And then also our agency has participated in disaster assistance for various, the Hurricane Ida, things like that. So we've utilized funds to help assist some of those organizations. We are looking to get recovery from FEMA or those other organizations, but at this point we incur those costs. So on page 5, this is a high level. As I said, we budget by program. So you'll see a list of the different programs there. And then this is fiscal year 22 without the enhancement. The next slide, I'll show it with the enhancement. But you can see some of the variances in our budget. Administration, for example, in fiscal year 22, there's a decrease of $747,000. I spoke about one of the initiatives to replace our rifles. That occurred in 21 and will not reoccur in 22. So you'll see some of the impact there. One of the largest increases you'll see is the operation support. That is mainly our uniforms. It's a $6.4 million increase. A lot of that's due to the salaries and wages drives most of that, and then some other equipment upgrades that we're going to be going through. You'll see a decrease in the COVID transactions. That was a pretty large decrease at $1.5 million. Homeland Security, we don't include the nonprofit subrecipients through that, so we may have an actual that's higher in 21, but we don't rebudget those for the next year, so it shows a decrease in there. And I spoke about the off-budget programs. That is where the difference comes with Megan's numbers and ours. Off-budget is one of our programs, so it's about $500,000 each year. Okay, and what I just explained was without enhancements. Now you see the impact of the fiscal year 22 adjusted budget versus what we did in 21. It's a net increase of $22 million, just a little over. This is with our enhancement. So obviously the primary increase in that is the aircraft at $18.1 million. And I will note that that is state general funds. Typically all of our activity in our budget is special revenue funds, or state highway fund is the main driver. And I'll share that breakdown of the funds here in just a few minutes. Moving to page 7, we have fiscal year 23 adjusted budget requests compared to our fiscal year 22. Again, this is without enhancements. So with that, it was pretty steady. You will see the biggest change was the $18 million for the aircraft operations. So there's a net decrease of $17.3 million without the enhancement. Turning to the next page for fiscal year 23 versus 22 with enhancement. That decrease moves from $17 million to $13 million. And operation support, there's a $3.5 million enhancement in that for the CPP. And then also you'll see $589,000 increase for the operating fund for the aircraft. And that will come, we have asked for that from the State Highway Fund. I'm sorry, we are on slide 8. All right, moving to slide 9. This is expenditure by category as a percent to our total budget. Show you a little bit where all the expenditures are. So for salaries and wages, without an enhancement, we're at 68%. If you include the enhancement for fiscal year 22, we're at 58%. Aid to locals, that's what we share our Homeland Security. We provide funding to the subrecipients out there. It's 4% without enhancement and 3% with. Obviously, you can see that with enhancement, those percents drop. Capital improvements is about 1% of our budget. Capital outlay without enhancement for 22 is 12%. And then it jumps to 24% with the enhancement, and that's the aircraft assets. Commodities, 7%, with enhancement 6%, and contractual services were 8% for both of them. So that is your fiscal year 22 expenditures by category as a percent to the total budget. Some of the variances that are accounted for in this, salaries and wages increased by about $5.3 million. These were salaries adjustments, include additional personnel, the CPP, shift differential, overtime, holiday, and the clothing allowance I mentioned, which those accounted for a little over $4 million. There's an increase in benefit rates between fiscal year 21 and 22, and that was $1.26 million. Contractual services increased $964,000. Communications, self-prop service, which is the aircraft enhancement, and then just a net effect of some of our contractual service adjustments accounted for that dollar amount. Moving to slide 11, continuing with the expenditures, our commodities decreased $49,000, and part of that was an offset. We had the rifle project that I talked about, almost $700,000, and then the enhancement is $709,000, so a small increase or decrease there. Capital outlay improvements increased by almost $1 million, and most of that's attributed to the aircraft enhancement for those assets. And then our capital improvement is $1.4 million. The lion's share of that is going towards our training academy and taking care of some of the issues there. Moving to slide 12. This is our fiscal year 23 expenditure by category as a percent to our total budget. So again, I have it broke down into with enhancements and without enhancements. And this levelizes a lot more when you don't have that aircraft in there. So salaries and wages without any enhancement is 68%. With the enhancement is 59%. Aid to local stays at 4%. Capital improvements 1%. Capital outlay, we go from 12% without an enhancement to 11%. Commodities stay at 7%, and contractual services are 8% of our budget. And then on slide 13, I have the key variances by category. Again, identifying the expenditure, salary and wages, their increase of the 4.2, which is the enhancement that we had for the CPP. Contractual services decreased by $647, and a lot of those you'll see the decrease because of the aircraft enhancement and neutralizing those in fiscal year 23. On page 14, you'll see expenditures by programs, and I'll move kind of swiftly past that one, and we'll go to slide 15, a little more of a visual of our expenditures by our programs that we have. So operations support, which is a lion's share, it's our uniform officers and troopers out there on the road. They're about 51% of our expenditures. Aircraft is 17, fleet 8, administration 7, and then it decreases from there. And I won't read those off to you. That's fiscal year 22 with the enhancements. Fiscal year 23 with the enhancements mirrors a little bit of the same. Operations support, still the lion's share at 61%. Aircraft operations drops down because we don't have that enhancement in there for the assets. Fleets at 9, administration 8, and then we drop down on the other programs from there. On slide 17, I'll talk a little bit about the revenue by our funds and how we actually get our money and to fund some of these projects. So this is fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 revenue by fund. So special revenue fund, the state highway fund, which is our primary funding source, and I think that was in 2013, They stopped doing the state general fund, and it was all highway fund and other special fee funds. So in fiscal year 22, 47% of our funding comes from this state highway fund. Fiscal year 23, it's 57, accounts for some of the enhancements. State general fund, this is a one-time fiscal year 22 funding for the aircraft, so it made up 15% of our budget. The funding was 15% of the budget in fiscal year 22, and then back down to 0 in 23. Special revenue, which is our fee funds, then a lot of those different funds that we have, 27% of our budget in 22 and 30 in 23. We also have a lot of federal grants, federal funding that we have, and it makes up 11% in 22 and 13% of our funding in 23. And then some of our other funds there are negligible, under 1%. So on slide 18, I just provided a history of our operations fund. So that's the appropriated fund that we get, the main one, from the state highway fund. And I had mentioned the one-time $18.1 million for fiscal year 22. Slide 19 just gives you an overview, a graph, so you can see the trend of the appropriations fund. And it does include the enhancements in there, so that's the large increase at the end. So enough about all those fun numbers. So the KHP budget enhancement requests that we had. So the first one was a law enforcement asset replacement in fiscal year 2022, $18.1 million. Then the second enhancement was the Air Support Operating Fund. And that would be ongoing of $1.3 million. That reverts back to the State Highway Fund. And then enhancement number 3 is the Trooper and LEO pay plans. And that's $3.6 million in fiscal year 2023. And that would also be funded out of the State Highway Fund. I'll give you a quick update on the coronavirus funding. So as mentioned before, we had $135,588 of the coronavirus emergency supplemental fund. We're using that for PPE. It has all been spent. That's actually been closed now with the grant office. The agency has reached out to the American Rescue Plan Act. The ARPA agency project requests include aircraft modernization. So we are looking for other funding for the aircraft other than just going state general fund or state highway fund. We also are asking for the state interoperability communication system enhancement. That's radios. We included KDOT with our request on that, and that's at $17.9 million. And the capital improvement to the KHP Law Enforcement Training Academy is $5 million. We're finding a lot of projects out there as that facility ages that we're trying to address, and their fee fund right now doesn't support those. So we are working through those. And with that, I would stand for questions, or if we need our subject matter experts on the enhancements, we can have them come up here.
Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A series of questions that may be on budget and maybe for the Colonel. Let's start out with the CPP enhancement of $3.6 million. What does that give us a starting pay of for a new recruit? Per hour is probably the easiest way to do that if we could.
I can tell you right now, as of January 9th, it was $19.16, and then it would be an increase on that, but I don't have those specific numbers on
what that. If you could get those for us before Ways and Means considers it, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
Let's talk then about the aircraft plan. Can you tell me why this is a SGF one-time expenditure rather than the State Highway Fund? I think in the past it's been a State Highway Fund transfer. This time, for the first time it appears, unless I missed something last time, it is straight SGF.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Senator, that I don't have information on. The governor recommended this, comes from SGF. I don't know if it's availability of funds. I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. I was just interested because FY22 still has some substantial transfers from the State Highway Fund that are extraordinary transfers in the amount of $97 million, with $66,850 of that being a cash transfer to SGF. So then let's talk about, and this might be for Colonel Jones, I did want to talk briefly about asset forfeiture. We have an individual, Mr. Martinez, who has, yeah, you're welcome to come up. This is only, this one's for you, who had a vehicle seized by the Kansas Highway Patrol and scheduled for destruction. Can you give us some background on that, the crime that Mr. Martinez is accused of or convicted of, and then, of course, why we're destroying his vehicle?
Without going into great detail, but basically is by statute, if we in law enforcement encounter a vehicle that has an altered or removed identification number up there, we are to seize that. And in this case, from my understanding, the vehicle that he had purchased, it was difficulties of trying to identify. It had misinformation and what have you. So by law, we had seized that. And from what I can say of that is that it's gone through its process through the courts. And by our standing of that right there, we were in a process to actually seize this individual. I believe had been given the direction of where he had bought this or acquired that, and that was become the responsibility. But once this was brought to our agency for actual registration and proper deposition of the vehicle there, that's when we discovered the issue.
So you're following the statute, you're following the law, that's where you're at. You wouldn't have objection to that law having a change in it, which had you return that vehicle to Mr. Martinez, who has committed no crime that you're aware of?
Again, we're going to follow what the law is.
Fantastic. Yes. I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I am going to have a proviso regarding that item for Ways and Means. I will not bother the committee with this today, but when we do this budget in Ways and Means, we'll have a proviso there. I'd also like to explore further in Ways and Means the funding source for the aircraft plan and then the plan overall. I think we may have support for something more comprehensive over a multi-year plan. Having them all at once sets us up down the road for another very sizable all-at-once type scenario, and I think we would like to enhance that program and spread it out a bit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. Senator Glaze, I'm thinking that I'm probably in that area with the aircraft kind of thing, with what we do. My question was that last year you asked for 3 airplanes, and this year it's saying 2 helicopters and an airplane. What changed?
I believe this is the same of what we were asking.
Was it 2 helicopters and an airplane?
2 helicopters, one, and we were trading 3 aircraft, 2 fixed wing, 1
always
helicopter.
asked for 2 helicopters in.
I'm sorry?
Last year, did we ask for 2 helicopters?
Yes, we did.
Okay, that's my question on that. How do you decide how many helicopters you need? You know, what's the difference between 5 and 2? What's your process you go through to decide your need?
Well, I think my subject matter expert would be best to answer that. But basically, we're looking at the calls that we receive and the mission and goals that we have to assist, have an asset for not only for ourselves, but also for local law enforcement and other agencies or so.
Do you have a list of like your usage that you've done in the last couple of years? That'd be interesting as to how often these are used.
Yes. Yes,
and what they're used for.
Yeah, our commander would probably be able to answer that even more directly on that.
Then when you ask for 18 million here and then ARPA, you're asking for 24 million. What's the difference there?
I'm sorry.
On the ARPA funds, you were requesting 24 million, and on the governor's, it was 18 million. I was trying to get a feel what's the difference in that area.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, that we actually were including the executive aircraft on the ARPA funds because there's also a need to upgrade that aircraft. But because of the ask in the budget, we asked for the 18 million for the law enforcement. ARPA does include trying to get the executive aircraft updated.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next, we'll have, I guess we've got a tentative here. Eric Sauer, was he, it said tentative. Was he wanting to speak? Okay. And how about Captain Jason Vanderweide? Is that correct? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, committee, we are running short of time, and there's another committee to come in here in 15 minutes. So I think we'll just wait on the deliberations on this and go ahead and have our hearing on the Adjutant General, being they are here. So let's start the hearing and deliberation, or probably won't deliberate, but a hearing deliberation on agency budget for the Adjutant Generals, Merle Riedel, KLRD. Welcome, committee, Merle.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Try to move through this pretty quickly. I am looking at a budget analysis titled Adjutant General's Department on the top. Just as a reminder, the Adjutant General's Department provides organization for readiness and training of the Kansas Air and Army National Guard, implementation of statewide emergency management programs, and homeland security for Kansas. I'm going to move right on to page 5. And on page 5, you'll see that the agency, the 2021 legislature approved an agency budget of about $6 million, including $9.6 million SGF. Adding to that was a reappropriation of $3.6 million that shifted from FY21 to FY22. Moving down on page 5, looking at agency estimate, the agency requests a revised estimate of $167.2 million, including $13.5 million SGF in FY 2022. This is an all funds increase of $103.6 million and an SGF increase of $358,247 above the FY 22 approved amount. Moving through looking some of the agency's adjustment, you'll see item 2 is a supplemental for deferred maintenance. The agency requests $638,960, including $319,000 SGF to begin renovation and modernization of the 38 armories and other National Guard facilities. You'll see that generally with these requests, there is a 50% match of federal funds. So that request includes 50% SGF, 50% federal. Item 2 is a supplemental for rehabilitation and repair. Agency requests $166,000, including $83,000 SGF for additional routine repair and rehabilitation among the 38 armories. So just to distinguish the two, between the two, for deferred maintenance, we're really talking about large restoration projects among the facilities. And for repair and rehabilitation, we're really talking about security upgrades, groundkeeping, or improvements to achieve code compliance. Looking on page 6, you'll see an agency has a supplemental request for state disaster payment. The agency requests $22 million, including $2 million SGF to reimburse eligible expenses for state, local, nonprofit organizations for federally declared disasters. Agency notes that payments for federally declared disasters require a 25% cash match. An increase of $2 million SGF would leverage an additional $20 million in payments for flooding in 2019 and for expenditures related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Item 5, you'll see a large increase related to COVID-19 federal relief. The agency's revised estimate includes an increase of $49.2 million from COVID-19 federal relief funds provided pursuant to Federal CARES Act and subsequent federal legislation. Increases include $46.1 million from a COVID-19 public assistance grant provided through FEMA. Just to note, monies from the Federal Coronavirus Relief Fund may be used to meet the FEMA state match requirement for this fund. That's significant to note, and you'll see shortly why. You'll also see an increase of $1.7 million from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which was awarded by the Spark Task Force last year to partially meet the FEMA state match requirements. That's an unusual circumstance when federal funds are used to match federal funds, but with the CARES Act and the discretionary funds that was provided to states, a change in guidance allowed those federal funds to be used for match purposes. You'll also see $1.3 million from the Emergency Management Performance Supplemental Grant provided by FEMA to support pandemic recovery planning. You'll see a few other adjustments. I would draw your attention to item 8. COVID-19 State Response Fund. The agency's revised estimates include a decrease of 1.8 million SGF initially provided to KDIM for COVID-19 response. The decrease is due to the use of federal relief funds to offset SGF monies allocated for this purpose. Moving on to the governor's recommendation on page 7, governor recommends expenditures totaling $168.2 million, including $13.5 million SGF for FY22. Item 10 outlines the governor's adjustments. The governor recommends an increase of $1.1 million from special revenue funds for the Kansas Division of Emergency Management to update recovery plans with lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. This expenditure includes $525,000 from the State Emergency Fund to provide state match for $525,000 from the Federal Emergency Management Performance Grant. The recommendation includes transferring the unspent balance of the State Emergency Fund, which is $8.6 million, back to the State General Fund. So those state emergency funds, just as a reminder, these were funds initially, SGF, SGF monies approved by the State Finance Council for expenditures in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this happened pretty early on in the pandemic response, before it was clear how funds from the CARES Act might be used. State Finance Council approved that total expenditure. However, federal relief funds became available for this purpose, so the recommendation would return $8.6 million to the State General Fund. And I'm ready to move on to FY 2023, if you'd like. Looking on page 9, the agency requests $199.7 million, including $94.5 million SGF for FY 2023. This is an all funds increase of $32.5 million and an SGF increase of $81 million above the FY22 approved amount. You'll see some of the enhancements. Again, we have an enhancement for deferred maintenance. Agency requests $5 million, includes $2.5 million SGF to continue renovation and modernization of the 38 armories. Item number 2 is an enhancement for rehabilitation and repair. Agency requests $1 million, including $500,000 SGF for rehabilitation and repair. Item 3 is again another enhancement request for state disaster payments. Agency requests $20.2 million, including $1.8 million SGF. Item 4 is enhancement for KDIM positions. Agency requests $610,910 all SGF for the addition of 8.5 FTF positions in KDIM at the State Defense Building. In addition to their primary roles, these positions would augment the State Emergency Management Operations Center during periods of activation, and you can see there's a variety of positions. Item number 6 is an enhancement for the Kansas Intelligence Fusion positions. Agency requests $601,686 all SGF for 2 FTE positions at the Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center. This is primarily related to INBAF in Manhattan going online, and the agency has identified potential emerging threats related to agricultural infrastructure. Item number 6 is an enhancement for the State Defense Building remodel. Agency requests $21 million all SGF for complete remodeling of the current State Defense Building, which primarily houses KDIM and the State Emergency Management Operations Center. Item 7 is enhancement for a super system licensing fee, which is a operational cost associated with a online portal that allows emergency management agencies throughout the state to submit plans. Item number 8 is enhancement for a new Hayes Armory. You'll see new Hayes Armory / ARPA. Agency requests $18.1 million to establish a new National Guard Armory in Hayes. The estimate includes the purchase of 15 acres at $2.1 million and the construction of a 49,000 square foot National Guard Readiness Center. Agency suggests discretionary funds provided through ARPA may be suitable to be used for SGF in this purpose. And then item 9 is an enhancement for deferred maintenance, also associated with ARPA. Essentially, the agency is requesting $35.8 million to address deferred maintenance among all remaining National Guard armories. Agency suggests discretionary funds provided through ARPA may also be used to replace SGF for this purpose. Item 10, the agency is requesting $6 million for a supply warehouse. Item number 11, The agency is requesting $137,000 to redesign the ks.gov or the Adjutant General's website. And then you'll see as item 12 is really an adjustment to those federal funds, essentially reversing some of those federal funds that were awarded in the previous fiscal year. And then you'll see a variety of other adjustments. Moving on to page 12 is the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends expenditures totaling $157.4 million, including $52.3 million SGF for FY 2023. The governor recommends an enhancement for KDM position. Governor recommends $300,000 SGF for 4 FTE positions at KDM, which is a decrease of 310 and 4.5 FTE positions below the agency's request. Item number 18. Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center positions. The governor recommends $100,843 SGF for 1 FTE position at the Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center, which is a decrease of $100,843 and 1 FTE position below the agency's request. Super system licensing fee. Governor does not recommend that enhancement. Item 20, enhancement for deferred maintenance, ARPA. Governor does not recommend the agency's enhancement request of $35.8 million SGF for deferred maintenance. Recommendation notes that ARPA funding will be pursued with the Spark Task Force for this purpose. Item 21, enhancement for warehouse. Governor does not recommend the agency's enhancement request of $6 million for the purchase of an emergency supply warehouse. Item 22, enhancement for ks.gov. The governor recommends $124,500 SGF for website redesign, which is a decrease of $12,500 below the agency's request. Finally, item 23, the Office of Emergency Management. The governor recommends an increase of $122,481 SGF, offset by a decrease of the same amount from special revenue funds for maintaining and training statewide communications interoperability. These expenditures were previously funded through an annual transfer from KDOT. This recommendation notes that the adjustment would cease that transfer in 2023. And Mr. Chairman, that's a very quick overview. I can stand for questions.
Questions for Merle? Seeing none, thank you, Merle. Major General David Weishauer, Adjutant General. Welcome, committee, Major.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Major General Weishauer, Adjutant General. Thank you for the opportunity to stand before you to discuss the Adjutant General's Department budget requests, including the governor's budget. As you well know, the Adjutant General's Department is responsible for the operations of the Kansas Army and Air National Guard, the Kansas Division of Emergency Management, Kansas Homeland Security, and the administrative support of the Kansas Wing of the Civil Air Patrol. The diverse nature of our agency makes it unique in that it receives funding from both the state and federal government. As you'll see from the governor's and our budget requests, there are portions which are entirely state funded, entirely federally funded, or split between the two, in which some of the federal funding is unavailable without the required state match. Your support for these items is not only critical to military readiness, but also emergency management activities that support and protect our state and nation. I think Merle did a great job of summarizing ours. I'm just going to jump right into this in the pursuit of getting out here and getting the room available. So if you go to slide number 3, please. Some of the numbers from our 2021 budget actuals. As you see, our allocation from the state budget is relatively small to our overall budget. The bulk of our funding comes from the federal government, but much of that has to be matched with the state funds. And you'll see some of the graphical depiction of some of that on the next slide. 2 exceptions for our budget that are 100% state funded are emergency communications and the Civil Air Patrol, of which those are not large budgets, but those are 100% state funded. And as you can see, we continue to have a significant amount of disaster relief funding coming into the state and the agency. If you go to slide 4, you'll see the percentages that are all federal government funding versus state funding. The Army Guard facilities at the top left of the slide that you have there is 88.6% federal funding. Top right, the Air Guard facilities are 89.4% federal funding. And then Division of Emergency Management is 84% of that operation is funded by the federal government. Go to the next slide, slide number 5. Open disasters that we have across the state. Merle talked about those a little bit. Standard disasters are open somewhere between 4 and 6 years. So every year we have to come up with a state budget to do the state match, so we get that federal funding in. So if we were to pay that entire bill today, it'd be about $15 million as a state match. We're not asking for that $15 million because the disasters are still open, so we don't need that all right now. And that's a 75-25 split, as Merle explained. But that 25% of the state responsibility also is broken down a bit further, in that 10% of it is the state, 15% is the county as to where it was impacted. And then if you see on the bottom of that slide, COVID-19, as Maury alluded to, that went from the federal and state share to 100% federal. So there was questions last year about how much we were spending with COVID. It's a blank this year. Slide number 6 is a quick update on past appropriations and some of the things that the budget has done for us. Rehab, repair, and deferred maintenance. You hear a lot about that in our budget. So some of the top things that we did this past year: a foundation repair at the Kansas City Radio Center, which was significant to maintaining that building. Iowa Armory fire suppression and fire alarm systems were replaced. We had generators repaired across the state, which helps our resiliency and helps our facilities across the state to be basically community centers and emergency support services for communities. And simply exterior overhead door repairs. It's no different than a garage door failing at your house. It seems pretty minute, seems pretty small, but if there's no money, it's pretty big. And then the State Emergency Operations Center design. You gave us $1.6 million last year to go through a design because the State Emergency Operations Center in KDM is not designed for in this case, a large pandemic and other associated emergencies. So we had this pandemic going on. We also had wildland fires and flooding going on at the same time. It was not conducive to doing those operations together. So we had to use other buildings. So we'd like to have the State Emergency Operations Center redesigned to make it a truly functional State Emergency Operations Center. Slide number 7, you'll see some of the large construction projects that we've had across the state. Both of those are up in Leavenworth, and those were both federally funded. We did a barracks and an Army Readiness Center. Both of those, like I said, were federally funded, started in 2018. The anticipation was that we were going to be done early 2021. As a result of COVID, we finally finished those projects in December of 2021. We're scheduled to have a ribbon cutting ceremony in March of this year. The next 3 slides, you'll see where we ask for your support. The first one is deferred maintenance, rehab, and repair. Like I said, you've heard me talk a lot about this. Merle talk a lot about it. That is our number 1 for supplemental and enhancements. 70% of our facilities across the state are either poor or failing in quality. This is an area where we have to have 50-50 match, and it's the only way we can support our buildings and what we do. Again, you heard Merle talk about $36 million is the hole we're in right now for deferred maintenance. What we're really looking for is a continuous budget, a baseline budget on an annual basis, instead of coming here asking every year for a supplemental. If we can have a solid budget every year, we can get after taking care of the deferred maintenance and the repair and rehab of those facilities. So the current facility, again, 70% of them failing. We can't do the training we're supposed to do in all those facilities. And they're not good in the communities. A lot of communities rely on those as community centers. So some of those just simply are not safe for our community members to be in. Next slide is disaster funding. Again, we talked a lot about that. For FY22, we're looking for a supplemental of $2 million, which will get us an additional $22 million from the federal government. In FY23, we're looking at $1.8 million. That'll get us a little over $20 million from the federal government. The Kansas Division of Emergency Management positions is the next line item there. 4 positions will help us out tremendously. 2 of those positions will be GIS specialists. Geospatial information is used tremendously across the state during disasters and also in disaster preparation and mitigation. Counties call us and ask us for lots of databases, and we have our GIS experts, again, supporting the state with that. The next one is a resource management planner. KDM is responsible for commodity distribution, just a wealth of resources, and we don't have a body to take care of that. And we didn't realize how short we were until COVID came in, and there was nobody there. So we just had to task other agencies and do what we could do to try to fill that position. And then the last one in KDM is a curriculum trainer. There's a lot of training that we do across the state. And it's our responsibility to train those individuals. And again, we simply don't have a trainer that can take care of that. The last position on that slide is the Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center position. That is a bioag intelligence analyst. With NBAF coming online, we have to know what threats we have to the state of Kansas and to our bioag distribution or disregard, or bioag businesses out there. So that's really what this position would be designed for and do. We've asked for that for a couple of different years. It's really coming to this is critical this year because NBAF is scheduled to come online this summer. The last slide, where we're asking for your help, is the State Defense Building Remodel. As I spoke earlier, you gave us $1.6 million to look at a redesign of that facility. We got the redesign working right now, and then we will need monies to simply do the physical work and redesign that. Space currently is not conducive to what we need. Hayes Armory, we talked a little bit about that. That thing is 60 years old. Is not sufficient for the training needs and the requirements of our Army National Guard out there in Hayes. It's built in a floodplain. 60 years ago, what I understand, it was not a floodplain. It is today, so we can't add on to the facility. It doesn't make sense to repair and rehab that facility. It makes more sense to build that facility. So about 2.1 of that would be for land, and 16 million would be for the facility. And then the last bullet there, rebuild of the ks.gov website. We don't have the IT experts to rebuild websites, so this thing was done about 12 years ago, and it simply doesn't meet IT compliance and IT standards that we have today. And again, it's used by multiple agencies across the state, so it's just an ask to get us some money to get us back in compliance. So with that, as I speed through the slides, I'm open for questions or any further discussion you'd like to have.
Thank you, Major. I think we've got another committee needs to come in here, but we're going to meet after session and deliberate. I don't know if you would have time to stick around and answer a few questions at that time before we deliberate.
So what time would that be?
Probably around 3 o'clock.
So I've got another one at 3:30. So I would be available from 3 to 3:30, and then I get to go see another committee.
We'll have you in first then.
Okay. Where would you like to be? Here or what?
Right here. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Committee, we'll need to reconvene after session. Don't know what time that'll be for sure, but we'll come back and have questions with the major and then also deliberate. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.